What is going on, GBA fans? My name is Berk, and today we'll be bringing you the Week 8 Pick'em crew for the GBA Season 7. And of course, I am not alone. I am joined by Matty Brolick.
What is going on, everyone? You have Matty Brolick back here once again, joining my good buddy Berk, as we are going to go over the previous week of the Pick'em crew and the week coming up.
Yeah, so the previous week, there's a lot more red than we're used to, especially the fans. The fans did not do well this past week, only going 3 and 5. They're the only one that went negative, and Spastic. But Spastic seems to have taken the place of Bill as our perpetual not good at picking person. I don't want to say anything really too mean. But most of us going 5 and 3. Everyone getting Lars wrong. Most of us getting mono wrong. So when you got picks like that, not many people are going to be doing well this week.
Exactly.
However, we will move on to the next week, where our first match is the Pittsburgh Piratas versus the San Diego Chim Chargers, and we all have MV picked. Myself, Jarrett, Nick, and the fans locking on MV, and I think for good reason. At this point, we're far enough into the season where we can see who's doing well and who's doing not. MV is doing about as well as he did last season, kind of picking up big wins pretty much every week. He's 6 and 1 at this point, whereas Tup is 0 and 7, and it does not seem to be able to pick up any wins. So aside from the matchup, I'm going with MV just because I think he's a stronger player this season so far. And matchup-wise, Tup does have a Tapu Koko, which puts on a lot of pressure on MV's team. Again, MV has like a muck, but even still, Tapu Koko is quite a big offensive pressure for MV's team. But I feel like if he can deal with that effectively, I don't feel like he's going to have too much of a problem with this match, however.
Yeah, no, I also picked MV this week because looking at the matchup, I actually do like Tup's matchup here. He's got some pretty good checks to that rain offense that MV has on his team. And Tapu Koko is just a massive offensive threat. Like you said, like even something like Muck has to worry about the physical sets because it just kind of gets blown away by that. But obviously Muck can deal with the special sets pretty well. And Tup may want to bring Thunder on Tapu Koko, expecting the rain from MV, but that's kind of risky in my opinion. I think physical Tapu Koko, or even like mixed Tapu Koko, would be pretty nice in this matchup. So I think that Tup has a pretty solid matchup here. So if he really steps it up, he can win. But like you said, it's been pretty far into the season so far, and we know MV to just be a consistent coach week in and week out. And he's one that can play around poor matchups much better than others because of his ability to be really creative and stuff. So with that being said, I'm going to have to go with MV this week.
So up next, we have the San Jose Sharpedos versus the Tampa Bay Luxray, so you can talk about this second match.
Okay, so, when it comes to this, even though both guys have really offensive and powerful teams, it's just really hard to pick against Mono at this point in the season. I know that last week, he ended up upsetting most of us because he actually lost, but what's it called? It happens. It happens to the best players out there. They don't have their greatest day, or they get unlucky, whatever the case may be. Mono has just shown week in and week out this season that he is in it to win it, and that he's just a very powerful coach. And even though Tom's team puts a lot of offensive pressure on Mono's team also puts a lot of offensive pressure on Tom's. So I do think that just looking at how both coaches have been performing this season, the odds are with Mono, but Tom, when he plays well, is a very scary opponent with a very scary team. So anything could happen, but I'm going to have to pick Mono.
Yeah, I'm also going to have to pick Mono. I just don't see Mono losing 3 weeks in a row. Just to me, doesn't seem very likely. Aside from that, I think Mono's been a pretty consistent coach. Yeah, last week he made one bad play and then got really unlucky with the rolls right at the end. So he could have won that match, but you know, it happens. But I just don't see Mono losing again. I think he really wants to keep up and go 6-2, make sure he's competing with all the rest of the coaches that are 6-2 and 7-1. So I see Mono winning this one. And as you said, like the offensive matchup, both teams have really big threats to the other. Both Zygardes are big threats to the other team. So we'll see how each one can effectively handle those. And, you know, Tom has ways of dealing with things like the Buzzwole, offensive pressures like the Greninja. However, you know, it's going to be difficult matchup-wise for both of them. So we'll see who has the better planning, and whoever does will come out on top. So up next, we have the New Orleans Pelipers versus the Borussia Fan. And most of us have John picked. The reason I have John picked, for one, like I said about MV and Tup, John seems to be the more consistent coach so far this season. He's using his team well, and that does play into a role of why I picked him. I think he's just been using his team more effectively than Lars has been using his. That's not to say Lars can't win this match. Lars is a very good player, and I think he's starting to get used to how he uses his team. But for right now, I'm going to go with John. Matchup-wise, you look at John's team, it will struggle with some things on Lars's team. Magearna just looking like a gigantic threat because it can pretty much handle most of John's team given the right set. So John is going to have to plan really, really carefully around the Magearna. If not, he's going to be in for a tough time. But seeing as John's been able to plan very effectively week to week, I think he will be able to, and so I am going to give the win to John.
Yeah, I went with almost exactly the same approach here. Like, looking at the matchups, it was just hard to choose because both guys I like their teams a lot, especially Lars's. I actually like his one of the most in the league for sure. But it's just harder to pick against John than it is to pick against Lars at this point in the season because, like you said, John has just been using his team more effectively week in and week out. So it just seems like the momentum and the consistency is with him. And as an analyst, that is the type of consistency that you want to see week in and week out to help you make your picks, especially for the Pick'em crew, of course. So paying attention to the way John's been really in his groove this season, I just figured I would go with John, but this one easily can go in Lars's favor because he's got a great team and Lars is a very good player. So he could pull out a win at any time. So I definitely think this one's going to be up in the air, but that is why I decided to go with John, just because I think he's been more consistent overall.
So up next, we have the Utah Jasmine versus the San Francisco Arcanine, so you can talk about this one.
Okay, so Utah Jasmine versus George and the San Francisco Arcanines. We have Necro Stevo coaching the Utah Jasmine now, and he has been playing pretty well. And he's a great player, and he's a very good builder as well. He's definitely fun to watch. But I'm still going to go with George here because we all know how good George is, and his team is definitely solid all around. Both teams are pretty solid, but I think that mons like Mew, Raikou, Garchomp really pose a big threat to Necro's team. And overall, when you just consider all the circumstances, Necro picked up a team that was drafted by someone who is as zany as Cooper. And, you know, we all know how Cooper builds crazy teams, drafts some pretty crazy drafts. So Necro may not be used to his draft nearly as much as, you know, someone like George is to his own team. So he's kind of playing at a little bit of a disadvantage there. And overall, I think George has a slight matchup advantage here, to say the least. So with that being said, I think that George is probably going to take it.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a similar mindset. I did pick George. I think George is in the part of the season where he needs to make sure he's winning all of his games to stay in the playoff race. And he's 4-3, so he's definitely not out of it, but I'm pretty sure George is going to want to pick up another win here. to make sure that he's staying very competitive with teams like MV and Chimpact and so forth.
Definitely.
So I did go with George. Necro definitely has a chance. Obviously, things like Manaphy are a gigantic threat to George's team. I know George has a Raikou, but it is a Manaphy, and Manaphy's always a threat to every team. And then the amount of setup sweepers that just Necro has that George has to make sure to stop. If George can effectively make sure that Reuniclus can't set up or Manaphy can't set up, then I feel like George will be able to take this match. So up next, we have the Florida Gators versus the San Francisco Giants. And almost all of us going with the Florida Gators, Blue going with the San Francisco Giants, believing in Geo. Now, I am going with the Florida Gators, and I'm guessing most of us are going with the Florida Gators for many of the same reasons why we said other teams we think are going to win. And a lot of it's due to consistency. Gator, while he's not at the top of his league, I think he's been a little bit more consistent than Geo this season, and so I'm more confident that Gator will be able to win this game than Geo. It's not to say Geo will not win this match. In terms of team matchup, I kind of do like what Geo has for Gator's team, and some of Gator's offensive threats are going to be difficult to take down a lot of Geo's walls, like Tapu Fini walls like half of Gator's team. So if Geo can use his walls effectively, I feel like Gator's going to have definitely a hard time breaking through, and I see Geo being able to win this match. But because I've just seen Gator use his team better so far this season, I am going to go with Gator and the Florida Gators.
Yeah, no, this one was definitely tough to pick because Geo does have a pretty nice matchup here. Like, a lot of his offense does, puts in quite a bit of work towards Gator's team, and like you said, his defensive cores are definitely going to be pretty tough for Gator to try to break through. But we have seen Gator be pretty creative this season, especially considering the fact that this is his first time playing in the draft format. So very impressed, but he's still learning. So to overcome this matchup will be tough for him, but he's just been far and away a lot more consistent than Geo has so far this season. So if Geo picks it up and plays how we know, or plays as well as we know he could play, then I do think he has a very good shot at winning this one. But because he hasn't been for the most part, I'm just going to go with Gator here because, like we've been saying for a lot of these matchups, it's been far enough in the season to say that Gator has been a lot more consistent than Geo, and that is huge when you're making these picks. So I'm also going to have to go with Gator here.
And then up next, we've got the Philadelphia Scissors versus the Milwaukee Sawbucks. So why don't you talk about this one?
Okay, now, this one, I guess it's just Chimpact has a very scary team. And Chimpact has been playing quite well this season. And then you have Steve, who really has struggled to get in his groove. And I've made it known that I'm really not a huge fan of his team. And I think that Chimpact's team really just kind of destroys a lot of Steve's. Like, obviously, Steve has some big threats, but overall, I think Chimpact's team just outmatches Steve's in a lot of ways. And just considering the fact that Chimpact is such a strong coach and player, I really don't see Steve coming out with the win this week, even if he does play well, even if he does catch Chimpact a little bit off guard. I just think that Chimpact's team alone really just overpowers Steve's, and the fact that Chimpact just is so much more consistent than Steve on a regular basis, I don't see Steve getting this win. So I decided to lock for Chimpact this week.
Yeah, for me, this was going to be, I was either going to lock for this match or I was going to lock for MV. And I mean, you pretty much said it all. Chimp has been playing really well this season. He is now 6-1, whereas Steve is 1-6. And so Chimp has been a very consistent coach, consistently winning, and Steve has been a consistently losing coach. So under those circumstances, I think it's relatively easy to see why we would pick Chimpact over Steve. Does that say Steve cannot win at all? Of course not. We've seen some pretty big upsets, especially last season with Steve. He's been able to pull out some big wins towards the end of the season. But right now, I have no reason to pick against Chim for this match. So up next, we've got the St. Louis Rampardos versus the Detroit Steelwings, and we're all pretty split on this match. About half of us going for the Detroit Steelwings, half of us going for the St. Louis Rampardos, and I went with the Detroit Steelwings because, for one, I do like Crimson's team matchup. Like this was a hard match to call. This is actually a very hard match to call because they've both been playing somewhat similar this season. Dan's been picking it up lately. Crimson has been playing pretty well throughout the entire season so far. So for me, it kind of came down to team matchup. I look at the teams. I look at Tornadus Therian. It's a huge threat to Dan's team. And then I said this to Crimson before, but I said Volcarona is, if you can set up a Volcarona, Dan really does not have much to stop it, because you just got to get rid of pretty much like Toxapex. And once that's gone, Volcarona kind of has a field day with Dan's team. So if Crimson can use Volcarona effectively and maybe help weaken the team, pivoting around with Tornadus Therian, and then he's also got ways, pretty good ways of taking down Toxapex with like Crocodile and Slowbro. I feel like Crimson could be able to take this match. But I'm still split either way, but I am going to go with Crimson.
Yeah, this one was definitely tough to call because Dan's coming off of one of the biggest wins he's had in a while. He beat Mono last week, so that's obviously huge. And even though he definitely had a slower start to the season, we've seen what Dan's capable of in the past. So it's hard to argue against his past results, knowing that he could really pick it up and play well. Now, as far as the matchup goes, he does not. Crimson does not have Z Volcarona, which means that he can't bring something like a Z Psychic for the Toxapex, which is definitely nice for Dan. That doesn't mean that Toxapex, is going to safely counter Volcarona, but it does make it a nicer check, because if he's especially defensive, or if he's holding a Payapa Berry or something like that, he could just come in, take whatever hit he pleases, and just go right for the haze or something like that. But regardless, that Volcarona is still a massive threat. Now, things like Terrakion, Victini, even Haxorus are really offensively threatening against Crimson's team. So I do think those could potentially work in Dan's favor, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to pick him, because I do think he has not a good matchup, but an okay matchup in some ways. I do think that Crimson may have the matchup overall, but seeing Dan come off such a huge win and Crimson is actually coming off of a loss, I do think that Dan has the ability to win this one, but this one's totally up in the air. I could definitely see Crimson winning it, and it was a difficult one to call, as you said.
Yeah, so the last match of... All right, let's see if I can speak correctly. So the last match of the week, we have the Free State Toracats versus the Alola Athletic, and we are very split on this one. 4 of us going for the Free State Toracats, the rest going for the Alola Athletic. And now I went with the Free State Toracats because overall, I like his matchup pretty good. Landorus Eye is a gigantic threat, even without the sheer force. Callum doesn't really have too much for Landorus Eye, just because it gets such a wide move pool. It can run both physical and special. And even without the sheer force, it still will just absolutely smack Sandrill. It can really hit the Shaman, the Crobat, and just go down the list. It hits almost the entirety of Callum's team for super effective. And then you throw in things like Keldeo, which, again, gigantic threat. I feel like Callum is going to struggle with dealing with some of Duncan's bulkier things like Mana Buzz, and like a defensive Metagross can also put in a lot of work. So overall, I like Duncan's team matchup, so I'm going to go with Duncan and the Free State Toracats.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that Duncan's matchup is pretty solid here. It is pretty cool that his Landorus Eye actually could abuse the Sand Force in this matchup potentially if he does decide to bring the Sand. So overall,
yeah, I forgot about that.
Duncan has a pretty good matchup here, and Duncan has been has definitely impressed me so far this season. He's not having a stellar season, but as a first-time draft league player, I do think that he is catching on fairly quickly. So Callum is as well, but I do see that, or I do feel like Duncan is a little bit more so, and with his matchup, I do think this match is in his favor. So with that being said, I'm just gonna have to pick Duncan here.
So that is going to wrap up the Week 8 Pick'em crew for the GBA Season 7. As always, please leave your picks down in the comment section below. Tell us who you're picking for, why you're picking for them, and then let us know why you're locking for who you're locking for. Any last words, Matty?
Not too many, just what I always say every week. Keep making your picks. Do them on Twitter as well. We have the polls up there every single week. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as we enjoyed making it. And hope you all have yourselves a fantastic day. And both Berk and I will see you all in the next one later.
See ya.